Hi everybody, this is a video about whether trauma can induce fibromyalgia. As per usual, nothing that I'm saying in my video should be construed as medical advice. This is for informational purposes only, and if you need medical advice, please talk to your healthcare provider to get that advice. So someone posted a question on one of my other videos, and I had the question up and managed to close the window and don't have time to go look for it again. But the gist of it was that this person was saying that they know people who had their fibromyalgia induced by pregnancy-related trauma or like kind of PTSD or some type of traumatic event. Person asking the question unfortunately said that her fibromyalgia was induced by domestic violence, and the question was ultimately is that something that like what's the link there? Like how the heck does this all sort of correlate? So to my understanding, there's been evidence indicating that when folks have a history of trauma, and my understanding is this, what I'm about to say largely stems from the research that's been done on adverse childhood events. So there's quite a lot of research several years ago that looked into these adverse childhood events, or ACEs for short, and basically these kind of sad, tragic, traumatic things that happen to kids over time can have an impact on their propensity to develop different disease issues or health issues later on in life. And so my understanding from that research evidence is that folks who have been impacted by adverse childhood events, and I believe this is something that extends to folks who suffer from other types of trauma as well, they have several physiological changes that happen that are very much in line with what we see in folks who are dealing with fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome or mold toxicity or chronic infections with, say, the Lyme disease causing bacteria, Borrelia burgdorferi, or others. So, something that's really important to be aware of, because of course, folks dealing with complex chronic illnesses may have one or more of those issues afoot. So if they have a history of trauma, then it may be that the trauma has, for all intents and purposes, kind of primed the pump, so to speak, of their physiology to be more prone to having some of these negative changes. So let's talk about what are those changes that can occur in the face of trauma. So one of them is that there is elevated levels of inflammation in the body, and that's a big problem, obviously in general, but especially because all of these causes, or multiple causes of complex chronic illness, have inflammation as a big hallmark of what they induce in the body as well. There's also, to my understanding, more of a predisposition to having hypersensitivities, so more of like a Th2 dominant type picture, so more of like a tendency to react to things, so whether that's reacting to foods or being more prone to autoimmune conditions, so like reacting to your body's own tissues and whatnot, or maybe reacting to environmental triggers or chemicals or whatnot. And then also, to my understanding, there are elevated levels of stress hormones in these folks overall, and stress hormones are important to be released at certain points in time, but we don't want to have elevated levels, higher than optimal levels all the time, because that can be quite wearing on our tissues and ultimately kind of send us into more of a state of depletion, kind of keep us in more of a wired state, preventing us from getting into more of a parasympathetic mode, compromise our vagus nerve tone. So if somebody walked up to you and said, hey, would you like to just be, have elevated baseline levels of inflammation, more reactivity to things, and more stress hormones kicking around, you say, no, that sounds awful. If I have those things already pre-existing in my system, I'm going to be more prone to other health issues coming up. And indeed, that clinically, at least, I don't know that this has been definitively investigated or proven in formal clinical trials or scientific trials, but it certainly makes a heck of a lot of sense that trauma would predispose folks to having these other chronic health maladies. And so the way I look at it when I'm talking to my patients, and I know that they disclose to me or it comes up in conversation that they have a history of trauma, I think to myself, I wonder if that's why you are having, more issues, like why you're having symptoms of mold toxicity, where maybe the other folks that were living in your house, didn't have that same history, or the other folks that were living in your, your dorm or something like that, or went to the same school as you, or whatever it happened to be, wherever that exposure might have been. Is that trauma actually, again, priming the pump physiologically for there to be broader issues down the road? So that's, to my understanding, where the link comes in with history of these traumatic events and having a maybe more likely to be prone to fibromyalgia, which, as I mentioned in the video that the comment was posted on, could be linked to chronic infections like with the Lyme disease causing bacteria or mold or other things like that. So I hope that this information was useful. If anybody has any questions about this topic or anything else, please post in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer as soon as I can.